Thank you all for inviting me here today. And more important, I'd like to thank you all for fighting for my freedom. So, it's very much appreciated. So, most of my career, I've been working in developing and transitioning countries, and particularly in conflict zones and in high risk environments. And one thing I've learned over the years is that a big opportunity comes out of every disaster. And I think Ukraine is in a position now to think ahead and think about how you can best position yourself after the war is over, and also think about how you can do business better and build things better. And one of the things that I've heard repeatedly as I've worked in the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia has been that the current system for doing business and looking at how to manage risk, and particularly the use of the ISO standards, is an antiquated system that isn't quite working. And I think now could be an opportunity to build a newer, more modern system. Remember, the system that ISO uses was started and built, and the model hasn't changed that much since before the internet. So it's worth thinking about how you can do business better. So one thing is not going to change when the war's over, is the way people look at doing business and the way foreign investors and foreign companies are going to be interested in doing business. They're still going to be looking at the basic things of, can you provide the quality services and products that they're interested in? But in today's interconnected world, they also, businesses that you will partner with, will expect you to be able to manage all kinds of different risks. And you can see in this slide here that you have a whole range of risks that you're going to need to manage, and that companies that you'll partner with are going to be looking for that you have the ability to manage this. The problem with the current system is all of these things are built in isolation and in separate silos. Today, businesses want to see that you can do all of these things. So it sets off, how do you rethink the way you manage risk? So you're building a single model that can cope with all of these different types of risks, make your organization more resilient and more sustainable, and also present people with a level of comfort of doing business with you, so you can assure them that you have transparency, that you have the proper governance structures, and that you can comply with laws, regulations, contract, voluntary commitments, and that you can manage this array of risks. So this is the problem with the current system. The ISO is structured in a way where they have separate technical committees for every little area that they're looking at. I think there are over 300 technical committees now in ISO, all working in their own little world, all believing that theirs is the most important thing that you're managing. So what this has resulted in is a complex system of multiple standards, overlapping, a lot of times also having conflicting requirements in the standards, and it's increasingly time consuming and costly. And the flip side of that is that a lot of the multinational companies just don't believe that you can do the things in the standards, because there's been this movement in, I want to get certified. The companies really aren't interested if you're certified. One of the, I'm in a think tank of major supply chain companies, and in our last discussion, several of the companies were talking about, if somebody comes to them and their immediate response is, do business with us, we're certified, they walk away. That's a bad opening. They want to know that you can manage risk and that their company will be protected if you do business with them. The other problem is, with this proliferation of standards, is you've reached a point now where you've created a cottage industry of certification bodies that it's questionable whether they actually have the expertise to audit you and certify and validate that indeed you have all the pieces in place. So it becomes a lot of a paper exercise for a lot of companies, and the auditing process also becomes a paper exercise where you're focused on the processes, but not necessarily the outcomes of what you're doing. And to give you an idea of how bad it is, this cartoon is several years old, and it's talking about there's a constant discussion. And I've been involved in these for years because I've been involved in the doing ISO standards now for a couple decades. And it started out, you had the quality standard, then the environmental standard. It's now proliferated into approximately 30 management system standards. So how do you know which one to do? And how do you know if you're working with a company that another company that you might want to work with will give you another list of different standards to work with? So the trick then becomes, how do you put all this together in an integrated fashion so you can actually accomplish something? So the idea is to come up with a new paradigm for doing business and doing ISO standards. And the idea is to build a single framework that is a risk-based management system, and then depending on the needs of the company and depending on the partners and depending on the local culture and the environment you're working on, you can then tailor the system to put different emphasis on different types of risks that your organization is facing, as well as what you need to give a level of comfort to the people that you're working with. So you're tailoring it more towards the local risk environment, you're tailoring it to the local culture, and then you can actually manage things. The other thing is you can do this as an intelligence gathering exercise. When you're focusing on risk from an overall perspective, this gives you the advantage that a lot of what you're doing is this looking at and thinking of what are the right questions to ask so I can manage my current situation and then also be forward thinking and think about, I have certain objectives, where do I need to go? What different paths do I need to take to achieve those objectives? So it's changing the model. So rather than essentially driving forward by looking through the rear view mirror, you're looking out the front windscreen and you're looking at where you're going and you're thinking about the different paths that you need to take. Some paths might give you more opportunities. Some paths might have more pitfalls. But then you can better plan, you have the intelligence to plan, and it becomes more data driven. So it also, the focus being on objectives, it becomes more efficient in the use of resources, it becomes more effective in the processes you use, and you can then have a much better and coordinated organization and move forward with that. So the idea is to consolidate essentially these 30 different management system standards into one risk-based management system that will then be used to cover the different things that you're interested in. It does not like me.
No back.
Go back. The other thing that you can attach to this system, which if anybody's used an ISO standard, you have the problem of it's all or nothing. You either get certified because you've done all the clauses in the standard, and sometimes some of the clauses just aren't relevant, and you end up spending a lot of time and paperwork plotting out something that doesn't make sense. And then the other thing is you have to think about, you have a whole organization of people. If they don't understand why they're doing something and they don't see the direct benefit, they don't do it. So the idea is also to change the model. So you build it on a maturity model, so then you're thinking about how to build success on success. And I constantly have companies come to me and go, oh, we need to be ISO certified for a contract. Can you do this in 6 months? And I always tell them, if you want to do that, I can give you somebody who can do that, but I don't do that. I look at that if this is going to be sustainable, it's a gradual change because you're focused on a change of culture in the organization. And if you can change the culture of the organization, then it starts sustaining itself and the process works a lot better. So most companies, to do an effective cultural change, it takes about a year or two. But once you achieve that cultural change, it sort of goes on autopilot. And the idea is you start with a problem that everybody recognizes, you solve that problem, and you have that psychological boost that, wow, this really works, this is worth my while, it's actually making my job easier, I'll continue this process to fix more things. So it also allows partners, when they look at you and they think about working with you, and they don't necessarily need to have everything that's in these different standards. They want to know, do you have an overall strategy to manage risk? Do you have the pieces in place to manage this? If something pops up, if there's a pandemic, if there's a war, if something changes, does this strategy have enough flexibility built into it that you can respond, you can change what you're doing, and you can quickly adjust to what you're doing? But again, that only works if you've created this culture within the organization that everybody in the organization is thinking about. They contribute to risk, they're affected by risk, so everybody is a risk maker and a risk taker. So everybody in the organization is a risk manager, and it's not just something that's done in isolation. So you can make this change and transition in a smooth fashion. And also the companies from the outside, if you're grading it and you have a bronze level, a silver level, and a gold level, the company who's looking at you, they know their level of comfort. You can enter in the game a lot earlier if the company from the outside looks at, well, you've achieved this minimum level, so they're willing to work with you as long as they know you're working towards improvement. And we built something like this in South Africa before the World Cup there, and it really worked nicely because it did work, that some companies were willing to work and feel comfortable at the bronze level, some at the silver, and some did request the gold. Okay, the last slide is the final piece that I'll just leave it at this. The other thing you can do when you start building this system is you can digitize it all. Instead of having physical auditors travel all around the world and come and examine, if you have a process in place, they can do, say you have a Procter and Gamble and they want to do business here. They don't need to hire a third-party auditor to come out here and send a report, which they might not believe because all they're getting is a report that you're certified and the process is in place. They can actually do a second-party audit and look at, do you have a risk plan? Do you have the necessary governance in place? Do you have a compliance management system in place? And they can do all this digitally today. And the interesting thing is, during the pandemic, the third-party certification bodies had to switch over to do remote auditing. They're now back to physical auditing, but it can be done and it's a lot easier. So you end up with a system that is more data-driven. It gives someone a better level of confidence because the company that's doing a second-party audit knows exactly what they feel comfortable with and what they will trust you with and what they will sign a contract with you with. So all of this can be done with modern tools. So the good news is, well, the bad news first. The bad news is this doesn't exist yet. All the pieces are there. They have to be put together in a single, putting the puzzle pieces together and doing it, which is a very doable thing. And the good news is I'm going to be staying for another few months and working at the Odessa National Economic University, and we're going to start building this out. I mean, it's going to take a lot longer than a few months, but hopefully we'll be able to build this out, and this will be able to be rolled out as a Ukrainian innovation that will be a contribution to changing the model. And at least from the feedback that I've gotten from developing countries, transitioning companies, and particularly major international supply chain companies, they would really like this. But you always have the problem of who's going to take the first step. So I'm hoping to work with people here and develop this model so then we can use it to drive change here. You know, the other thing I didn't mention that you can do, once you digitize this, one of the things that has been driving this proliferation of standards in ISO is consultants realize the more standards they develop, the more consulting money they can make because they have to train you how to do all these separate things. So once this is digitized, you have everything you need to build online as well, examples, training tools, case studies, and training modules to help people. So if a company says, we want you to make sure that this risk is managed, this is really important to us, you'll have a knowledge base that you can tap into to apply to build out for your company what are the necessary procedures, what are the processes that you need to be able to demonstrate to the company that you can handle this, this isn't going to be a problem. So if any of you are interested in following this or would want to participate, I've been collecting volunteers, both from supply chain companies. So please give me a card, because one of the things that we want to do once we start doing this is pilot test it here in Ukraine to demonstrate the concept, as well as get feedback from companies of, you know, first of all, if we're writing a standard and we're explaining this, does it make sense? Is it, you know, again, like some of the other standards that are so esoteric or so obtuse that you have a hard time, what does that mean? By the way, I've been sitting in many an ISO meeting where we spend an entire day arguing over one clause, and half the people at the end of the day still don't understand what you're talking about in that clause. And my comment usually is, you know, if people in this room don't understand what we're talking about, how are the people who read this after it's published talking about? Because they don't have a little bottle with this committee in it that they can open up and poof, they get an explanation. So the trick really is to try to move this away from this cottage industry of standards developers that are also consultants and trainers and certifiers, and empower companies to look at their risks and build real systems that can manage the risk and make doing business more attractive here in Ukraine, and hopefully move on with development when the war is over and when victory comes. So thank you for having me here, and if there are any questions, glad to take them.
Thank you, Professor Siegel. Because of time limits, I have just several questions, short questions. The first one, how would you respond to those critics who might say that such a comprehensive risk management system could be like too idealistic for post-war Ukraine?
Well, first of all, you know you're going to have a whole industry jump on you of people who are doing this cottage industry. But I'm in the committee that did the ISO 31000 risk standard. And people constantly talk about this as needed, but the politics within ISO stops it from happening because you have to get all the technical committees to agree. So I think there'll be initial pushback, but the feedback I've gotten from at least major supply chain companies.
Ukrainian?
the major supply chain companies are mainly American and Western European, and they're very positive about the idea and are interested in it. So it's going to be the thing that, I mean, it's a wait and see. You have to build it first and see if it works. Then you have the ability to hopefully change the model. But the advantage is people are dissatisfied with the model. And I've also heard from some insurance companies that it would make their life a lot easier, particularly if this is digitized, because then they don't have to get secondhand information to try to figure out what their level of risk is.
Thank you. By the way, we have some insurance company here. Our Andrea, can you hear now? Okay, hopefully he can hear. Another question from Oleg Shaparenko, he is our alumni. It is well known fact that people all over the world are surprised so much by the way Ukrainians do business. We are very hardworking, smart, talented, fast and motivated nation. So, do you think we really need to focus on existing international standards, or it can be even more important for Ukrainians to create and protect our own unique standards of doing successful business?
Well, the reality is if you build this, this is your unique standard. You become the leader in this. So you can model it to, to fit what you need for doing international business. Ideally, you don't always look at this as a standard. You don't look at it as something that you're certifying to. You're looking at it as a way of improving your business. So for example, a company that I've been coaching in Pakistan for years, that is the largest security firm in the country, we went through this method and I built for them an integrated management system. It completely transformed the way they do business, but they look at it as this was a model for building a new business management system, and the certification was gravy. And the thing that's interesting is and I think this is a catch that's going to happen in Ukraine, they got stuck in the certification cycle. So they were very proud to be the first company in the developing world to certify to the standard for quality and the security operations and protecting human rights. They have gone well beyond the requirements of the standard. They essentially were put in a position where they can't use a Pakistani certification body because who would trust a local certification body? So they have to pay for someone to come from the UK who is unfamiliar with the local environment, is unfamiliar with the culture, unfamiliar with the company, unfamiliar with the way businesses work in Pakistan. And they do an audit, and the company also brags that they're now the benchmark for doing these because they're the only company that has now gone through, I think they're on their third round of recertification and yearly certification audits. They've never had a single nonconformance. And their problem is they look at, well, we really don't need to maintain our certification anymore because everybody knows we can perform at this level and people claim we're the benchmark. But it's like an addiction. If they give up the certification because they've gone beyond it, their competitors will latch on to they lost their certification. And the ironic twist is their competitors went to a different certification body that didn't do an audit, that gave them a consultant that prepared all the paperwork for them, and to somebody on the outside, the two pieces of paper look exactly the same. And at the end of the day, the company on the outside who's thinking of doing business with you, they just see that piece of paper. So it becomes, almost this vicious cycle. And the company in Pakistan is big enough that they spend, I would say, a minimum of $30,000 a year on surveillance audits. And it probably comes close to $100,000 every time they have to do, every 3 years, a full recertification. And for what?
Okay, and as of time limits, we have to make a conclusion. May I ask you? May I ask you to raise your hand? Who is going to participate in international project to rebuild Ukraine after the victory? Whose company are going to participate in such kind of project? Please raise your hands. Будь ласка, підніміть руки, чиї компанії будуть, ви передбачаєте, що вони будуть залучені до процесу відновлення в якихось міжнародних проєктах в Україні? Okay. I would say that about 20 companies are going to participate. But for such kind of companies, from one point of view, you said that the process of certification, it's like consulting to make this company more resilient, more protected because of risk management. From other point of view, having international certificate, it's a good way to find, let's say, partners, money, to projects to participate after victory. Yes. For such companies, what is your idea? What could be the immediate steps what they have to perform right now to be prepared to such kind of?
Well, the truth is, if you go through this process and you build something like this, it covers all the requirements. If you know somebody comes to you and says, "I want to see you can do the ISO 9001," you can immediately show them that you have all those pieces in place because this incorporates it. If then they come to you and say, "Well, you know, we need to know that you can also do the environmental 14,001 standard," you also have those pieces in place that you can easily show them that you can do it. And if they insist, and the pattern seems to be declining of them insisting that you have a certification, then since you already have the pieces in place, getting the certification is quite easy.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Siegel.
Okay.
Thank you. I would like to say that Professor is very actively support Ukraine. Now you heard that he is going to Odessa right after Kiev, and he's going to stay here. And let's say thank you to Professor Siegel that he is with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.